Welcome to the Freedom from Religion Foundation's Ask an Atheist show. I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor, co-founder and co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and I'm co-hosting the show today, and I'll be joined by Barbara Alvarez, who is the Freedom from Religion Foundation's premier Annie Laurie Gaylor reproductive rights intern and an expert on today's topic, which is abortion and the religious war against abortion rights. If you have any questions or comments about today's show, leave them in the comments here on Facebook or email to askanatheist@ffrf.org. And next week, FFRF attorneys will do a roundup on all of the Supreme Court's recent cases affecting our work. And that includes two very bad rulings handed down just today. The Guadalupe case, letting religious schools discriminate in hiring and firing, and the Little Sisters case that expands the rights of employers to deny contraceptive coverage to women workers. A few weeks ago, however, the Supreme Court did hand down a surprisingly good decision. It struck down a restrictive Louisiana abortion law. And here to talk with us about that and many other facets of the abortion debate is FFRF's reproductive rights intern, Barbara Alvarez. Barbara Alvarez is a PhD candidate who last year was a major winner in FFRF's essay competition for graduate students, and she wrote about abortion and the Bible. So welcome to Ask an Atheist, Barbara.
Thank you for having me, Annie Laurie.
So Barbara, like many of our members, you were raised as a Catholic, correct?
I was. I was raised in a Catholic family. I went to Catholic school from preschool through 8th grade. So it was a really big part of my life.
And you were telling me, that you won an essay competition as a Catholic schoolgirl that was very different than the competition you won for FFRF. So do you want to tell us about that?
Sure. So I went to Catholic school for 10 years. And for our 8th grade graduation, we were asked by the Knights of Columbus, which is a fraternal Catholic organization, to write an essay that would be have 3 prize winners for first, second, and third place. And so, I was wondering what the topic was going to be about. And in true Catholic school fashion, we were asked to write about why abortion is evil. So, I wrote my essay with everything that I had learned in Catholic school about why abortion was wrong. And I submitted it. And on the day of graduation in church, that's where we had our graduation ceremony, they were announcing the winners. And I came in first place. And it was such a big deal for me. I was so excited. My family was so proud. So it's very ironic, and I feel like redemptive, that 16 years later, I entered another essay competition about the Bible and abortion, but this time it was with the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and it was about why the Bible is used in legislation to make restrictive abortion laws that are really damaging to women.
So you came to understand that, if women don't have reproductive rights, we really don't have any real liberty, because if you can't control your fertility, you can't control the rest of your life. So well done. And let's talk about some of those restrictions and how that was actually struck down 2 weeks ago by the U.S. Supreme Court. And that case was June Medical. It was a Louisiana case, and it involved a trap law. Can you tell our viewers what a trap law means?
Sure. A trap law is a targeted regulation for abortion providers. So essentially what they are pieces of legislation to supposedly make abortion safer. But really what they do is they target abortion providers and make abortion more restrictive and actually unsafer because they prevent women from receiving timely abortion care.
So this law in Louisiana that went up to the Supreme Court was identical to a law that was struck down by the Supreme Court, was it 5 years ago now, in the whole woman health? in the Whole Woman Health case, and that was a Texas law. And what does that law say?
So the 2016 case, Whole Woman's Health versus Hellerstedt, based in Texas, was basically identical. And what it would do would require abortion providers to have admitting privileges to hospitals within 30 miles. And so basically, again, like trap laws do, they say that this is for safety. But abortion is extremely safe. And what this would actually do is make abortion clinics, close down abortion clinics because of these new admitting privilege requirements. And so it would actually, instead of making abortion safer, which it claimed to do, it would be denying abortion access. So this case, it was a 5-3 decision, said that this was an unconstitutional burden, that there was not proof that there was going to be the benefits outweighed the burden. So they struck it down, saying that it was unconstitutional. This latest case, June Medical Services versus Rousseau in Louisiana, is nearly identical to that case.
So that's what was so concerning to all of us who support abortion rights, that there were 4 votes on the U.S. Supreme Court to rehear the same issue that they just heard 4 years ago. And of course, what had changed, Barbara, between the Whole Woman Health case and this case?
Right. So what had changed was we have a completely different Supreme Court. It's now a very conservative court. We have 2 new justices that were elected by President Trump, who promised to elect anti-abortion Supreme Court justices, which he did. Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are the 2 new Supreme Court justices. And so now that we have this completely different Supreme Court makeup, there was a lot of concern about how this case is going, how this decision is going to change from the 2016 decision.
So, of course, Gorsuch replaced somebody who was already anti-abortion, Scalia, but Kavanaugh replaced Justice Kennedy, who was our swing vote, who was pretty good on abortion rights. So we lost a vote. So it has been a nail-biter waiting for the decision by the Supreme Court. But as I said earlier, we got a positive ruling. It was a 5-4 decision with the Chief Justice, Roberts, who is a firm and ardent Catholic, joining the small majority in upholding the constitutional rights of women to have an abortion and saying that the trap law in Louisiana was unconstitutional. And do you remember the reasoning that they used in striking down that law, Barbara?
So basically, like you were saying, we now have these 2 new justices. Kavanaugh is very anti-abortion. He, prior to joining the Supreme Court, he denied a detained immigrant from receiving an abortion who was 17 years old. So there was a lot of, like you were saying, this is a nail biter. We weren't sure how it was going to unfold. As expected, Kavanaugh dissented with the opinion, which basically came out to be that because this is identical and that this precedent has already been set, that this is also unconstitutional. And that's where that swing was with Roberts. Roberts said that he didn't agree with the decision for Whole Women's Health. He actually dissented with that opinion in 2016, but he's going off of precedent here. So this is it's maintaining the status quo is what this is. This isn't a victory for abortion rights. It's maintaining the status quo because Roberts basically said that this is a duplicate and that I'm going to maintain precedent.
So the Whole Woman's Health decision said that it was an undue burden on women. And so that was found to be true in the Louisiana case. But I think what we're all concerned about with Roberts, who has never before issued any kind of ruling in favor of abortion rights, what's concerning is that he decided to decide this on precedent, stare decisis. He said there was a case 4 years ago, we need to honor precedent. And so I think what many of us are worried about is that there will be other trap laws and other restrictions on abortion where there won't be that clear precedent of a specific case by the Supreme Court, and then we will lose his vote. And it's very concerning.
And he basically said that in his concurring opinion. He released his own opinion, basically saying he didn't agree with how whole women's health went down, that he is doing this based off of precedent. But he's also signaling that he is very much open to new lawsuits that challenge what an undue burden is. So he is not having a change of heart by any means. He's not an abortion rights champion. This is a close shave. It was strictly based off of precedent. There's a lot of room for new lawsuits to come in that can strip away abortion rights. And Roberts basically signaled that in his concurring opinion.
Of course, if he honors precedent, he would honor the precedent of Roe versus Wade, the 1973 case that recognized that women had a right to privacy, that this was a decision that they could make in consultation with their doctor, and that the state really didn't have any interest in it except to protect the woman's health. So hopefully, I mean, we never know. Hope springs eternal, but we have a very bad situation in this country where we had 9 states last year, 8 or 9 states actually passed outright abortion bans. A lot of them were the so-called fetal heartbeat ban, which is really a pulse. So, the anti-abortionists are certainly feeling like they have a chance to continue to restrict women's rights. And that brings me to an earlier decision by the Supreme Court many, many years ago, I think the late 70s, that upheld a restriction called the Hyde Amendment. And this has been very timely this week because it was just appeared in an appropriations bill. And so, Barbara, you are writing blogs for the Freedom from Religion Foundation every week. They're excellent. And just by coincidence, last week, you wrote a blog on the Hyde Amendment. And let's talk a little bit about what that is.
Sure. Well, the Hyde Amendment first came to public face in 1976. Henry J. Hyde, who's a legislator from Illinois, he introduced the aptly named Hyde Amendment. Very staunch Catholic. He was raised Catholic. He went to Catholic universities for his undergrad, for law school. And basically, after Roe v. Wade became law in 1973, he wanted to find a way to make abortion effectively inaccessible. So he became a legislator in 1975. He did this in his freshman term. And
in Congress, we're talking about.
Oh, yes, Illinois. I'm sorry, in Congress. Yeah, in Congress. And so he did this during his freshman term in Congress. And in 1976, he introduced the Hyde Amendment, which basically was an amendment to an appropriations bill. So it has to constantly be renewed. And what it does is it restricts federal funding to resources like Medicaid. So it says that federal funding cannot be used for abortion health care coverage in Medicaid. Since then, it's been expanded to many other federal programs like Peace Corps, Native American women who are on federal health insurance programs. But basically, so it restricts federal funding to programs like Medicare. States can pony up their own money if they want to, but that obviously puts a huge burden on states, because they're not getting this funding. In 1980, the Supreme Court found that the Hyde Amendment wasn't unconstitutional. So since 1918, McCrae versus, slipping my mind at the moment, McCrae versus Harris is the 1980 Supreme Court case that found that the Hyde Amendment is constitutional, that it doesn't, because people can still get abortions out of pocket, supposedly, even though we know that there's so many barriers to that. So this has been going on for almost 50 years. And there's a lot of talk recently, since about 2014, groups by women of color have been advocating for ending the Hyde Amendment for some time. And there's been a lot of talk in this upcoming presidential election and new Congress terms to repeal the Hyde Amendment.
And I should say that most states do not pick up paying for abortion care for low-income women who qualify for Medicaid. And among them is the state of Wisconsin, where the Freedom from Religion Foundation is based and where this program is broadcasting from. And the state of Wisconsin cut it off in the late 70s, almost as soon as the Hyde Amendment was cut off. And so it's a great injustice. It means that abortion is largely inaccessible because if you are low income, you don't have the money to pay for abortion. It's so clearly targeting the poor. And so many abortion funds were created around this to counteract that. And among them is the Women's Medical Fund, which is a Wisconsin abortion fund. It's a 501c3 educational charity, and all the funds that are donated go to pay for abortion care for indigent women. It's all volunteer. And right now I'm taking the intake calls, Barbara, while we're working remotely. Usually there's several of us doing intake. And I can tell you that the need is so great during COVID. Most of the women callers have been laid off, and or they're essential workers whose hours have been reduced, so they're at risk, but they also have a reduced income. Most of those women who've been laid off have not been able to access unemployment. They either haven't worked long enough or it just hasn't come. We're dealing with crises here, and women are afraid they're going to lose their rent, money that have moved in with family members. And here the state would force them unwillingly to become mothers against their will. They're already usually mothers who are trying to care for the children they already have. So it's a huge, huge injustice. And if you would like to help, do a little advertisement for the Women's Medical Fund, you can contribute online. You can go to Women's Medical Fund, look for Wisconsin, because there's some with different names in other states, and you can make a donation that will help somebody. We usually help 900 to 1,000 women every year. And as I said, the need is so great. Who wants to have an unwanted pregnancy during a pandemic? So we would love to have your help on that. And thank you, Barbara, for explaining the Hyde Amendment. Now let's talk about some of the other issues that you have blogged about related to abortion rights. And one of them that I thought was so interesting was a piece that you did on LGBTQ and the issue of reproductive rights. And I wonder if you could explain, how that's relevant, because some people might think that that isn't relevant at all.
Sure. So June was Pride Month. And so I felt that it was very timely to include a blog piece about why reproductive rights are important to the LGBTQ community. This is also at a time during Pride Month where the Trump administration reversed provisions that had been in place through the Obama administration that basically said that physicians couldn't discriminate based off of gender identity in the Affordable Care Act, and the Trump administration has reversed this. That is just the very latest in the type of discrimination that the LGBTQ community endure in when seeking health services. So, for example, the LGBTQ community, they are 29% are denied health care. They can be denied health care by a doctor because of their gender identity. And a lot of people don't realize that abortion rights and reproductive rights are just as essential to members of the LGBTQ community as well. So much of the time when we're talking about abortion, we have this very narrow vision of white, heterosexual, cis-identified women. But really it impacts everybody. For example, people who identify as lesbian are 2 to 10 more times likely to become pregnant. That's not even, addressing the fact that people of the LGBTQ community can still have sexual relations with people of, the opposite sex. They're still subject to rape. So reproductive rights is a universal issue. And the LGBTQ community already facing discrimination across the board, socioeconomic discrimination, healthcare discrimination. When we're taking away reproductive rights, it's just an added layer to that chips away at their rights, that their access for bodily autonomy. And so reproductive rights is essential to everybody, including the LGBTQ community.
And you've also done a blog about Abortion is a Blessing, which is the book that was authored by Annie Laurie Gaylor, for whom the your internship is named. You're the premier recipient of that internship, and a very appropriate one, Barbara. And Anne Gaylor was the principal founder of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I was a co-founder with her, but I was a college student when we started FFRF in the late 70s, and she took it and made it what it is. And she's also started as an abortion rights crusader in the state of Wisconsin and was serving on the National NARAL board. And it was her abortion rights advocacy and contraceptive rights advocacy that opened our eyes to the need to keep religion out of government, because we saw that the only organized opposition to abortion rights and contraceptive rights is religion. So it could have been some other issue that opened our eyes, but it did happen to be that reproductive rights issue. And she was also a co-founder and principal administrator of the Women's Medical Fund charity. So who says atheists don't start and run charities? So you did a blog about the idea of abortion as a blessing, and I wondered if you might want to talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, I do want to say that Anne Nicole Gaylor's book, Abortion is a Blessing, is available on the Freedom from Religion Foundation's website. It is excellent. It is just as timely as it was when it was written, which is unfortunate that we still are encountering the same issues despite the fact that we have Roe v. Wade now. And I think that just shows that Roe v. Wade is not enough. Legalization is not enough. And so Abortion is a Blessing really talks about how giving women bodily autonomy, allowing them to make their own reproductive choices is essential. And that abortion, it's so often painted by religious communities as this evil thing, but really it gives people bodily autonomy. It gives people power to make their own life choices. And when we don't have that, we're being denied our basic human rights. And abortion, so going off of a couple of things about why abortion is a blessing, it's one of the safest medical procedures that there is. In this recent case, June Medical Services versus Russo, June Medical Services is also known as Hope Clinic. And so they're an abortion clinic in Louisiana. And over the past 20 years, they've provided 70,000 abortions. Only 4 of them resulted in complications that had to go to a hospital. So first of all, that's showing that admitting privileges were unnecessary, but it also shows that abortion is completely safe. Other studies have shown that 99% of women who receive an abortion within 5 years, a 5-year study, found that 99% did not regret having an abortion. They knew that this was the choice for them and that they actually felt sense of relief, sense of empowerment. Abortion is extremely safe. It is 96 to 98% safe. In fact, even more than that, actually. Less than 1% ends up in serious complications. That's one of the safest medical procedures that there is.
And I think also, just to add that it is 14 times more dangerous to go through childbirth than it is to have an abortion.
It is. And we are also, speaking of that, we're in a country where we have high maternal mortality rates, particularly for Black women and women of color. Louisiana, again, the state for June Medical Services, they're number 2 in the nation for Black maternal mortality rates, which is terrible. We should be putting our legislation, our money, and our efforts towards making pregnancy and childbirth safer, not adding restrictions to an extremely safe procedure.
And not forcing someone to undergo an unwanted pregnancy. And, especially when you're talking about people on medical assistance, it makes no fiscal sense to force somebody to carry through a pregnancy they don't want, and then the taxpayers are paying for that. When it's such a cruel and callous attitude to say, oh, we don't want our tax money to pay for an abortion. But look what they are paying for and endangering lives.
Well, and, bringing it back to the Hyde Amendment, they're saying we don't want our federal money to go towards paying for abortions. But then studies have found that the Hyde Amendment, when women are denied an abortion and they have to go through with a pregnancy that they don't want, in the end, it costs 2 to 5 times as much of public dollars with it for pregnancy, for childbirth, childcare, all of those types of things. And I think the core component is that it's stripping women away from making their own choices. So yes,
Yeah, it's
it
treating
doesn't
them
make fiscal sense. But
treating them in
to
a
boot,
condescending manner.
exactly, and it doesn't make fiscal sense. And to boot, you're putting women in situations that forcing them to be in situations that they don't want to be in. Like I said, that study found 99% do not regret having an abortion.
But before we take some questions and comments, Barbara, you were raised Catholic. You even won this award as a teenager against abortion rights. What opened your eyes to the need for reproductive rights?
I really think it was, I went to public high school. I went to the University of Illinois for undergrad and for my master's. And I really think it was getting outside of an insular community. This was a community I'd been in from when I was 4 to 14, the same students, small school, and, not a lot of diversity in thought, in education. And I think getting out of that insular community is what really opened my eyes. When I went away to University of Illinois, I took several Latino studies classes and gender women studies classes, and that opened me up to the intersectional struggles that women face. And one of the most classes I took was a U.S. public health and policy class that specifically talked about women's reproduction. And it was very, very eye-opening for me to learn about abortion, about reproductive rights from a historical lens, and then in a contemporary context.
And of course, reproductive rights includes the right to contraception to try to prevent unwanted pregnancies. And we saw today a very bad ruling in what is called the Little Sisters case. The Little Sisters are nuns. President Trump has trumpeted the Little Sisters in countless press releases and at the Rose Garden. He loves to talk about the Little Sisters who their case is now undoing even more the Affordable Care Act, the contraceptive mandate that President Obama was so prescient to make sure was part of the Affordable Care Act. The Hobby Lobby decision by the Supreme Court gutted part of that, saying corporations could have a religious objection to the contraceptive choices of their women employees. And now the Little Sisters took this follow-up case about their right to deny women employees their own contraceptive rights. And I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that decision. I haven't read it yet because it just came down, Barbara. But it was a 7-2 decision. And what I find so dismaying is that Justices Kagan and Breyer defected in this case, as they did in today's Guadalupe case. And that will be discussed next week on Ask an Atheist. But very dismaying to see these supposedly liberal justices siding with the very ultra-conservative Catholic arm of the Supreme Court, where it's dominated by Catholics. And I do want to say, though, a shout out, and I'm going to hold this up. Sorry, we did get, excuse me, a dissent by Justice Sotomayor, joined by joined by Ginsburg. I'm not sure who wrote it, but there were two of them, and they did write this dissent. But this is unraveling not just the Affordable Care Act, but it's an attack on women's autonomy, as you have said, and reproductive rights and contraceptive rights. And it makes no sense that anti-abortionists would oppose access to contraception unless they're Catholic or extremely fundamentalist, and then they think that it's all a sin.
Right. It just doesn't make sense. I haven't had a chance to read the opinion or, the decision or the dissenting opinion, but I saw it was 7-2, and I'm very disappointed in this decision. Like you said, it doesn't make sense. If you're against abortion, you would think that you would be for free contraception for everybody.
But not if you're a little sister nun and you think the whole thing is a terrible sin.
Right. And then it's a complete denial of separation of church and state.
Yes, that's right. And that's what we work for at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And Barbara, I'm going to make an advertisement for your blogs. which have all made the connection between the attacks on abortion rights and secular government and separation of church and state, because these attacks are all religion-based. And if you want to access Barbara's excellent blogs, you can go to our website at ffrf.org and go to the news link, and there's a drop-down. Or you can go to Patheos, which hosts our blog. It's called Free Thought Now. And Barbara Alvarez has produced at least a blog a week since her internship started in late May. And they're all excellent, informative articles. And Barbara, did you have anything else to add before we take questions?
Yeah, I actually did want to do a plug for one of the blog pieces that I think will get overlooked, in our national conversation about abortion. Puerto Rico, which is a colony of the United States, it has been a colony since, or a territory of the United States since 1917. It's been a commonwealth since then. Their governor just recently signed a new civil code. Everybody agreed they needed a new civil code. Their old one was from 1931, I believe. But in this new civil code, it recognizes the rights of fetuses. And it also has a lot of restrictions, rollbacks for the LGBTQ community. It doesn't go in effect until November, so lawyers are scrambling to interpret it and to hopefully halt it. But there was a lot of chatter on Twitter the night before the governor signed this new civil code that she was really pandering a lot to the evangelical and Catholic community in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, like I said, it's been a commonwealth since 1917, and they have a really difficult reproductive history on the island. They have the highest rate of sterilization. So this is just a more contemporary way that women's rights on their island may be stripped away.
So we do, and that was an excellent column, but so often news of Puerto Rico and the struggles there are overlooked in the continental U.S. So thank you for writing that. Now we do have a number of questions, so I'm going to go to that. And the first question is, how can these religious institutions be exempted from federal anti-discrimination laws, not pay taxes, yet still receive tax bailouts like they did through the PPP, the Payroll Protection Act? And this is a very good question. It's a little off topic, but we did just do a press release yesterday. You can find it at our website, pointing out billions and billions of dollars have gone to churches through the PPP, and that many, or if not most, of President Trump's colleagues on his evangelical advisory board have received lots of money. So very disturbing to see this. And we've even just got news that the Ark Park there in Kentucky received money. So all kinds of religious institutions and churches have been receiving direct money from taxpayers through the Forgivable Loan Program. So it's unprecedented, and we talked about it on Ask an Atheist, a hard one to sue over, but we are trying to call attention to it. Those loans are forgivable, but they could return them, and we'll be continuing to put out information as we find it. There was just a bunch of information released yesterday, as you probably know. So then we have a question, and it's from Dan Barker. And he asks, are all religious people anti-abortion? Aren't there Catholics and Protestants in favor of choice? And I'm going to direct that question to you, Barbara.
Absolutely. It's a great question. And in the recent article I wrote about the Hyde Amendment, I actually mention in there how there's a group called Catholics for Choice, and they are very instrumental in advocating for pro-choice legislation as well as for dismantling the Hyde Amendment. Also, in an article I wrote about reproductive justice, which is a framework that was founded by Black reproductive rights activists and medical specialists. They also, there's a reference in there about how Black communities who are active in their churches are also for reproductive justice and reproductive rights. So It's a really good question, because there are groups within religious denominations that believe in bodily autonomy and women's human right to an abortion. This is this type of legislation that we're seeing is coming from the top of these organizations that don't necessarily represent the people that go to their churches or go to their religious institutions. And that's what Catholics for Choice actually says, that the bishops don't represent them.
And most, more liberal churches have all supported Roe versus Wade, the Protestant. It's the fundamentalist, and it's the Catholic Church, the Mormon Church, their hierarchy, that are so adamantly opposed to abortion rights. And the Catholic Church works on this worldwide. But many American Catholics today disagree with their church, of course. So, but I think the point we're making is that the only organized opposition to religion is religious. It doesn't mean all religious people are opposed to abortion. In fact, most Americans support liberal legalized abortion. Mm-hmm. But that was a good question, Dan. And I have
77% of Americans support Roe v. Wade. So, exactly.
And so what current legislation, this is a question, is being pushed through at the state level right now to restrict abortion access, and what can we do about it?
Well, there is quite a bit going through right now. For example, Tennessee, they just passed a heartbeat bill, and they also are now requiring a informed consent that talks about the supposed benefits of abortion reversal pills, which is complete pseudoscience. And there have been no clinical studies that have demonstrated the effectiveness of abortion pill reversals. They're actually, the one study that was done most recently had to be stopped because it was damaging to the participants. And also I want to say, as Annie Laurie mentioned earlier, Tennessee's heartbeat bill, which is very similar to the bills that were passed last year, which would effectively ban abortions at 6 weeks. Heartbeat, it's really a misnomer. It's just a way to tug at the emotional heartstrings, because it is it's not a pulse at all.
Yeah, it's just a pulse.
And it's so that's one. Iowa's governor just signed a 24-hour mandatory waiting period. So that means that there would have to be, there's a separate informed consent for any type of medical procedure, including abortion. There's an informed consent process. However, Iowa, which Wisconsin currently has, would have a 24-hour waiting period. So after you get the information, you have to wait 24 hours before you actually get the procedure, which is a total undue burden, because it can require people to make 2 lengthy trips. It also
raises the price.
Yes,
it makes it more expensive.
Right.
Too.
So Iowa's governor just signed that. The ACLU and Planned Parenthood of Iowa are suing. Florida's governor just signed a mandatory parental consent law. Mississippi just banned abortion based off of sex and gender, sex, race, genetic abnormalities. And then basically it's now states are ramping up these restrictive trap laws. And so what we need to do is we need to hold our legislators accountable. That includes asking them to support the Women's Protection Act, which in 2019, it was reintroduced. It had originally been reintroduced in 2013. Wisconsin's Tammy Baldwin, Freedom from Religion is in Wisconsin, is a co-sponsor of the bill. And it would basically ban any type of restrictions related to fetal liability, heartbeat bills, things that single out abortion services. So we need to be active in that, in holding our legislators accountable, donating to funds like the Women's Medical Fund, and being vigilant.
And if you're a member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, we do send out action alerts at the state level. We can't always, there's so many at the abortion level, we can't always send them out, but the most egregious, the bans and so on, we always will notify you. So that's at the congressional level to preempt these anti-abortion trap laws and so on. So there's a question which I don't know the answer to, and I don't know if you know it either, Barbara. What were some of the religious reactions of legislators to the SCOTUS ruling in June Medical. I mean, of course, it was widely condemned.
Yep, I actually I have some examples with me, just what governors and what legislators were posting on social media, and I think it's really revealing for where their intentions are. You know, they say that this is about women's health and women's protection, but we know that it's really about pushing their own agenda, which is largely a religious agenda. So this breakdown of separation of church and state. I just want to point out a couple. South Dakota's governor. South Dakota is a state where they only have one abortion clinic. And for the last 20 years, they've been flying an abortion provider in and out from Minnesota. But with COVID-19, they haven't been able to do that because of travel restrictions. So South Dakota has effectively been without abortion access. Abortion is effectively not available in South Dakota during a global pandemic. They also don't allow telemedicine or anything like that. So women in that state need abortion care. And this is what their governor said on Facebook, or excuse me, on Twitter, after the June versus Medical Services decision came down. The fight for life is unquestionably the right one. Every child is a gift from God. These unborn babies can feel, think, and hear in the womb. Our work doesn't stop until abortion is eliminated completely. So talking about religion, about being a gift from God, again, it's focused on the governor's religious intentions, not based on science, which completely refutes all of her other statements. So science doesn't agree with this. That's a religious statement. Mike Rogers, who is a legislator in Alabama, he said that he's never going to give up on the effort until all of God's precious children, both born and unborn, are protected. And then Congressman Ralph Abraham from Louisiana basically said, as a Christian and a pro-life advocate, I will never stop fighting to protect the lives of the unborn. So that's just a sampling of some of the reactions that legislators have to this, and it's all religious based.
Well, yes, I think your examples show so clearly that it's this intent to legislate your own faith. If you don't want an abortion, don't have one. But to deny it to others based on your religious dogma is un-American. Well, Barbara, it was wonderful to talk with you, see you a little bit. Since we've been working remotely with you, unfortunately, we weren't able to be working with you at our office this summer, like we usually do with interns. And thank you so much for all of your work to educate. And thank you for watching Ask an Atheist. And if you want more information about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, you can go to ffrf.org. We'll be back next week at noon Central Time for another episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist.